Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
This is Bigger Questions with your host, Robert Martin.
Welcome to Bigger Questions. Today's big question, how can I cope on Mother's Day without Mum? Now, Bigger Questions is usually recorded before a live audience, but the social restrictions because of coronavirus has made it impossible for us to gather a live audience. But we can still manage to explore some big questions today via some remote interviewing technology, which we're using. Now, we're asking today's big question to Clayton Bjelan. Clayton is the Chief Operating Officer at Positive Media and hosts the popular In Conversation show broadcast on 89.9 The Light in Melbourne. He's been working in radio for over 15 years and has reputed to have interviewed over 1,700 people. So it's an absolute pleasure to welcome Clayton Bjelan to Bigger Questions. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Robert. I feel like I should clap because there's only two of us here and, that sort of thing. It's great to be here and I absolutely love Bigger Questions and, so it's a thrill to be on it.
Oh, that's terrific. Well, that's great because I must admit I'm feeling a little bit of pressure because you've spent years interviewing people. You've racked up over 1,700 interviews. I'm only at about 10% or so of that with Bigger Questions. So I'm feeling the pressure of a good interview here. So is it hard, though, not to be critical of other interview shows that you're watching or listening to?
Look, it is at sometimes, especially when I think they get to a question where they haven't thought through or they've not actually listened to what the person said and then they just repeat the exact thing because they're just going off their list of questions. So those moments I get pretty antsy and sometimes I just have to, turn off the television or turn off the radio or something that I'm listening to because it's just no point.
Right, okay, yeah. You don't turn off Bigger Questions too often though, do you, when that happens?
Never do.
Oh, that's very good. So do you ever get bored of trying to have conversations with so many people?
I don't. I'm one of those guys that when you go to the supermarket, I'm going to get into a long 5 to 10 minute conversation with the checkout chick like that. I'm just naturally built like that. So I'm constantly fascinated by people. I'm constantly fascinated by that moment of trying to understand something different about them that might inspire me. And also I actually have, and this isn't necessarily about the interviewing, this is more about life, but have that desire of as I learn about people, maybe is there something I can give them to encourage them through the day or help them through the day? So I have to know a bit about them before I can actually do that as well. So there's this inbuilt fascination for me that everyone's story is unique, but we're all made because of that uniqueness with a specific story that might just relate to someone else. And so I want to dig that up.
So hence it's a conversation then.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah,
you're getting something out and giving something at the same time.
It completely right. The best piece of advice I was ever given was by somebody who said to me, when you're interviewing somebody, if a white rabbit jumps up, follow it. Because, sometimes it might take you to the pot of gold. Other times it might just run down a burrow. Well, okay, you go back to your set questions and where it is, but you just never know. You might end up with some just fantastic material. But it requires listening. It requires actually being in the middle of the conversation. It really is a conversation rather than just a straight interview.
Now, we are living in some troubled times at the moment with the coronavirus pandemic. How have you been coping?
Look, it's been, I think like many people, I've been working out of home and so even been broadcasting out of home as well, which is quite a unique experience. So, for us, the kids have loved not having to get up and get to school. That's been wonderful. Yeah. But the school's been a bit of a challenge for us and our family. And there's, a lot of pressure in terms of how do we get all this done? How does it all work? How do I do my job? How does my wife still do her job at the same time all out of here? So we haven't really had the stir crazy aspect of having to get out. That's not been something for us. It's just been how do we actually get through all of this? And we're in incredibly fortunate situations that both my wife and I have still got jobs. And so we're certainly not complaining in any way there. But the pressure for us has been just how do we keep getting through life and sort of keep that fresh.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing about that, Clayton. And one of the other potential challenges for you this year is Mother's Day, where we celebrate and honour the mothers in our lives. Now, you've got a story to share about that, but before we think about that, do you think it's appropriate that we have a day to honour mothers like this?
Look, I think it is. I think the reason is that mums tend to be, I think, probably taken for granted. And there's a good and the bad of that, right? There's a good part of that. I think probably most mums would want to be taken for granted in one sense, that they know that they're dependably there for their family and for their kids. So in that sense, I think mums, tend to be pretty proud of that. And just to be fair here, we're talking about mums who are great at being mums, and we understand that there's some mums that aren't great at being mums, and I'm not sort of talking about that side of things. But so I think there's that part. And then I think the flip is that because we do take them for granted, because they're always dependably there, to actually take a moment to stop and say, hey, let's actually just pour a bit of love on mum is a valuable one. And I know certainly for me, as I was growing up in a household of boys and mum being the only female, it was a special moment. It was a very special moment for her, for us to just, dote on her a bit as we went forward. So growing up for us, it was a very important part.
So what sort of things did you used to do then to dote on your mum?
Look, it was just the normal sort of things, I think. It was the presents, it was the making the breakfast, it was the cards, it was just the moments to have her as the focus. She was really, really good at making us the focus always. And so, she was known as, she's looking after me and my brother and that sort of thing. And my dad was a pharmacist in a small sort of suburb here in Melbourne. And so she was always known as the chemist's wife. And so she never had her own sort of space. She was either the mum of the boys who were doing this stuff, or it's the chemist's wife. And so for us, I think it was actually a moment to say, hey, not just who you are, mum, but your identity is really valuable. So for us, it was lots of words, lots of time with her. That was the love language sort of stuff for her, quality time, words of affirmation. So that was what we did a lot.
So did she appreciate that on Mother's Day?
She did. She really did. And she always loved it when we made things, especially when we were kids. There's a famous story of me and my brother making toast and a glass of milk, I think it was. And then when, that was all lovely and nice, but then when mum and dad got up after, having breakfast in bed that we'd made them there for it, that as mum came down the stairs, there was a drop of milk on every single stair as she went down that we were there. So I think she loved that. And for mum, it was really much about family was just it for her. And it was so any moment to just stop and be together, whether it was about her or not, she didn't care. She just reveled in it.
So she wasn't perhaps necessarily so enthusiastic about getting the toast or the milk or the presents, but it was just more the people that had brought it to her and time to spend with those people.
Yeah, I think so. And I think she never would have said it like this, but I think an honouring of her, a moment to do that, was something really special for her, that she did get honoured. Just a moment for that, I think, was something she did revel in, but she wanted to put it like that. It was just that sort of joy.
Now, Clayton, today's big question is about Mother's Day, but this is a particularly challenging Mother's Day for you. For this is the first Mother's Day where you don't actually have your mum with you to celebrate. So can you maybe share us a bit about the journey for the last 12 months or so? What's happened?
Yeah. Look, it was mum, might have to go back a bit further than that. It was about 5 or 6 years ago where mum got breast cancer. And at that time, it was, no one had ever had cancer in our family, which is, quite rare, I suppose, for most families not to have really anyone who'd had cancer. And so she got through that, had to have a mastectomy, and there was a whole lot of things that occurred for her in that time. It was quite horrendous. It actually, but at that point, it was we're just going to get through this, and we did.
Yeah.
So we then, we sort of got back to normal life, and 5 years later, and we. Now last June, and she had just gone in for to get a knee replacement actually, and she'd just done some general tests for it, and she went to just do the final checks with the surgeon before they put her in a few weeks' time, and the surgeon.
So this wasn't anything. This wasn't connected to cancer or anything. This was just a completely separate.
Correct. 5 years on from cancer, nothing to do with it. She's now just having this knee op, and she goes in, and they say to her, "Oh, now, by the way, do you know why we asked for this other test?" She said, "Oh, no, they'd asked for a Zoin test beforehand." I said, "Oh, yeah, we'd just seen something and we've checked, and your cancer's come back. But it's not just come back, it's come back everywhere. It was lymph nodes, it was in the breast again, it was, and it even started in the liver." And so it was really quite serious all of a sudden. So from absolutely nothing, and she'd even had a cancer check just a couple of months before, and there was nothing there. Wow. So this had come really aggressively. And so sort of went from that moment to we weren't quite sure what was happening for the next little while, and they couldn't tell us how long it was going to be. And so, she was still dealing with this bad knee, and the knee was horrendous. And as we went through the journey, we discovered that she'd actually had a broken leg, and we don't know how long she'd been walking around on a broken leg either.
Oh, goodness me.
And so the journey ended up being a journey of just around 3 months. And we didn't know until probably those last few weeks that it was going to be that. We sort of knew quite early that it was going to be now a journey of months to maybe years. And just as things kept happening and happening and happening, we just got it got shorter and shorter and shorter until eventually we were told, look, it's just got so bad that there's just weeks to go. And sure enough, it was just about 3 weeks to go from there. And she passed on September the 7th last year.
Wow. So that's 3 months from when you went in for a knee operation to then to passing away. Like that's a bewildering speed in some sense.
Yeah, it is. And I think there's an aspect that certainly as there's others who have, they're gone in a moment. And yet, so I'm grateful for that time that we did have, but it also felt awfully quick. And especially in those, I can't remember exactly how many weeks it was something like 13 or 14 weeks. And she actually only spent about a week and a half, or it might have been 2 weeks out of hospital. So that whole time, because they did still put her through for the knee surgery, because at that stage they didn't know it was only going to be 3 months. They thought it might have been a couple of years. But by going in for the knee surgery, she had to come off some of the chemo, which was holding at bay the cancer. And then there was complications with that. And so then the cancer spread faster. And so, in the end, she didn't actually even get out of a chair for 13 weeks either. She wasn't really able to, apart from hobbling around a little bit. So it became this sort of journey that was quite, as much as it was quick and fast, it was always hard as well. She was in pain all the time, even though the cancer wasn't actually causing her pain. It was the knee that was causing pain. She wasn't able to do anything. You couldn't have those moments where you said, well, we know this is coming to an end, but what do you want to do? Well, I love going to the beach. Well, we couldn't go down to the beach then. We couldn't do those sorts of things. So yeah, it was a really interesting and frustrating and, and I say interesting, obviously not in a fun way, but
no,
yeah,
it's a challenging. Yeah. So, did you think through the final weeks there that you grew closer to your mum?
I would say probably no. We didn't especially grow closer because we were already incredibly close. So it wasn't something that grew closer. It was we just made sure we spent the time together. So one of the things I'd said very early on, and I meant it even to the point of, well, I'll quit the job if that's the case, because someone had said to me, you'll never regret the time you spend. And there's a lot of internal pressure, as in within myself, to go, especially when you didn't know how long. Oh, should I be at work? Should I be with mum? Should I, what should you do? You don't know. But I really was determined to spend the time with mum that I needed to spend with mum. And so when those last few weeks came, I just took off all work and I just spent every day with her. And that was something really special and special to be a part of. And I suppose it was one way that we were closer. I as much as I've done radio for years and years and years, and I've certainly had all my interviews up online and those sorts of things, I've never actually done a podcast series. I just had audio online. And so I'd thought about it with mum, and she had this sort of she's a very spiritual lady, very connected in her and discerning in her faith. And so years before she'd had a vision, she felt like she was standing in front of a whole crowd of women, almost like in a stadium, and it never happened. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about doing a podcast. And I thought, I wonder if she'd do a podcast with me from being diagnosed with incurable cancer, which was the word they gave her, to actually passing. And it would be a mother and son's journey. And so it was only a couple of days after she got diagnosed, I said, hey, Mum, I want to talk to you about this podcast idea. I chatted to her. She said yes. And I said, I actually came out of this vision that you said. And she's like, I can't believe that. I haven't thought of that vision for years. But as soon as you started talking, that's what I thought about.
Wow,
and
there you go.
So we did that. And so I've got 10 plus hours of recordings of us over the course of the weeks. And her voice gets worse and it's very hard to edit. And I've got to tell you that. But so in that sense, we got closer. And in that sense, we have a purpose, even still today, to share this journey, to help other people. And when we put this out, the aim is for mum was to help people who were going through cancer and at the same time to share her faith about Jesus, that she trusted Jesus no matter what. So there's still a connection that both of us have, I feel, that's still happening.
So that's a very special moment then.
It really was, and it's something that I still hold very dear. It's not finished. The editing and the processing and all that is not like quite a normal radio one. Like I need I need to go and listen and edit it and all those things in different ways. But for me, that still is occurring, and it's still a close part of it.
Now, you mentioned that she did have a faith and that she was a Christian believer. There is a verse in the Bible written by the Apostle Paul, which some have described as one of the sublimest and greatest statements ever made. The Apostle Paul's in chains in prison, perhaps contemplating his own death. And in Philippians 1:21, he writes, "For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." Now, apparently you and your mum spent a long time thinking and reflecting and pondering this verse. So what was it that struck you about it?
As much as she was a very godly woman, she didn't want to die. She a lot of people who have a faith often like, I'm ready to go and I'm ready to go and meet Jesus. She didn't. She did not want to die. Yeah. That's
one of the criticisms of the Christian faith. Some people think, well, if you're a Christian and then, well, this life doesn't mean anything and there's no point in living, you may as well just go and die and then that's the end. But that wasn't quite the experience of your mum.
No, complete opposite, and didn't change until all the way to the very end either. So that never changed. For her, she wanted to keep living. She wanted to spend the time with the grandkids and with the kids, and so for her, that was it. And I asked her actually, and in that podcast, and that was one of the positives of the podcast. I was able to ask her anything too because it was covered by this podcast, so I could ask a lot of questions. And one of the things I asked her was, "Are you scared of death?" And she talked about the fact that she wasn't scared of where she was going. She knew where she was going. She knew what was happening, but she was scared of the process of death. And as we talked about it, it was this sort of idea of she's losing out by leaving this life. She was very weighed down by this idea. And that's where we talked about this verse. And we spent a long time talking about this verse, about this idea that to live here in this world is to live for Jesus. And absolutely that's what she's going to do. But once that's done and once that's out of her control, to die is actually to gain more Jesus, to be with him, to have even more connection with him. And it was something that was very much a part of that mental and emotional coaching that I was doing to say, look, there is actually something, even as you go through this, there's something more. And she kept coming back to that. She knew the verse and she understood it, but she needed that reminder of it. And over the weeks, she would keep coming back to that. Even as the drugs were rattling the brain a little bit more, she'd go, what was that verse again that we talked about? What was that thing?
Right, yeah.
And she'd keep coming back to it.
So that hope of the future then, that obviously animated and affected her in a very profound way.
Yeah, it did. And I think it was just a reminder to say she knew that was fine, and it didn't change that she didn't want to leave this world, but it gave her the courage to go, all right, well, we're just going to keep moving forward. And I think that was the biggest part of that she was, rather than being sad about leaving it, she was like, okay, I'm sad about leaving it, but I know I'll also have more Jesus, and that's a good thing. And it was just a reminder of that, not that she was necessarily forgetting it, but it wasn't top of mind.
Yeah. So there was a real, obviously, hope there because many in our world, to die is to lose everything. And many people don't have a hope of a future existence. I mean, one atheist commentator on death said, "I've always felt that when I die, I am dead and gone. My conscious life will end, my interactions with others will end, and I will simply be gone." So then to live and to gain with Christ, I suppose, there's a massive difference there, and that's something that was tangible to her.
Yeah, it was, and for her, it was very much about that it was this is going to continue, and this life will continue, but it continues in a different form. Her soul continues, even if her body doesn't. And it's interesting for me in that moment. It was very much about how she went through, and yet the biggest thing I've gained from past this is that as much as I wasn't necessarily I don't think any of us are desiring death, but I suppose I probably was, if I'm honest enough, I was a little bit scared of what it was. And yet the thing I've gained since her passing is I'm nowhere near as scared of death anymore. And I know that the weird thing about that is, but I'm like, well, I'll see mum again. part of me is like, well, hold on, aren't I a Christian? Shouldn't I be more excited about seeing Jesus like there face to face? But I just realized that there's, we were built for connection, and that's a part of what God created us in who we are, and that she didn't just die and stop. She died, and she's gaining more and more and more now, and I'll actually eventually be a part of that with her as I pass eventually.
So you've just touched on maybe how it's impacted yourself, because I remember when my mum passed away much more unexpectedly and much more suddenly a number of years ago, that it did raise a number of big questions in my own life about, faith and meaning and the future, etc. So have there been any particular big questions that have you've confronted with or you've been pondering?
Look, one question has been, how do I get to sleep? And I know it's not quite in that sort of meta question you're asking of at the moment, but
they're connected though. I think it's a big question. There's no doubt about it.
Look, it's funny. I slept no problems while Mum was with us. I cried a lot towards the end, but no problems. Slept no problems all the way up to her funeral. The day since her funeral to today, I still haven't slept properly. I'm taking natural sleeping tablets and these sorts of things to try and help. There's been a massive impact of what that is. I think the big question that I'm perhaps asking is, aside from the sleeping part of it, is how do I not have any regrets? It's something that I asked myself when I had my kids, before I had my kids. How do I make sure I don't have any regrets when they grow up, that I'm one of those dads that says, oh, I worked too much and I don't want to do that. So I'm being very deliberate about that, and I haven't always succeeded, but I've been very deliberate. And interestingly, I made a decision 2 days before Mum's diagnosis that I was chatting with a friend, and she was talking about this idea that she rings her mum every day. And I thought, I talk to Mum probably maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks or something. I thought, maybe I should do that. And so I'd made this decision. I'm going to ring her every day. And I said, now don't go doing this, Clayton, and then not actually do it. You've got to really be sure you can. And I thought about it for a couple of days, and I went, no, I'm going to do it. And I made this decision, I'm going to do it. And so I rang her, and then I rang her the next day. And then on the third day, she got diagnosed and everything changed. And it's funny that I was so glad that I made that decision beforehand, that I'd made a decision not to regret or anything. And it was only 2 days before diagnosis, and I rang her every single day during it. And I've actually rung my dad every single day since as well. So I haven't missed a day ringing Dad. Now, sometimes it's about 11:30 at night when I remember, and I've forgotten. Thankfully, he's a late night owl, and I quickly give him a call. But for me, I want to take regret off the table.
So is regret, do you think, something that people may be pondering on Mother's Day as we reflect today about mothers, that there may be regrets people have?
Oh, look, I think so. I think for me, even in that final week with Mum, going over the fact that I didn't make that decision earlier was a really tough moment. I was sitting in the hospital, and the last week Mum effectively really couldn't majorly speak. There was a few words here and there, but she couldn't really speak. And so we'd sit there for hours, each of us, and I'd have my moment where I'm just holding Mum's hand, and she was pretty much out of it, and just thinking about it and talking to her about the things that I'm sorry I didn't do. I didn't ring you all the time, whatever. And it was a deep regret that was bitterly hurtful for me internally. And there was lots of tears, and I realized I had to deal with it. And I had to say, look, I can't do anything about that. I did make that decision, and I know she loves me, and I can tell her now. And so, I think regret is one of those things that does pop up. That the positive for me is regret can be dealt with. Now, it can't be dealt with in that it can go and fix everything. You can't do that. That's the whole point of it, right? The point of regret is you can't go back and fix it. But what you can do is say, okay, I'm going to acknowledge regret. I'm going to say that's an issue, and I feel sad about that, and I wish I'd done something different. I'm going to ask forgiveness if that's what's required. Then I'm going to say, this is a moment I'm going to move on from. And so I think Mother's Day can be a day for that. I think it's a day that would naturally and will naturally bring up regrets in a lot of people. And I think the hope is that ability, and it's really a forgiveness model that Jesus showed us, right? Of making sure we forgive, and that's a moment that's changed and we move on from here. But I think it would, and I hope people understand the hope of how we deal with the regret too.
So for you, the Christian message really offers a pathway of dealing with regret.
It absolutely does, because I think the thing I love, or there's many things I love about the Christian message and what Jesus brings, but is this idea that even when we screw up, and we all do, there can be a new hope and a new beginning. And the thing that I especially love about it is that it doesn't say that by that new hope and that new beginning, it makes everything perfect from behind. It actually acknowledges, actually, that's just really sucky. That's really awful. And you're not going to just naturally have all the feelings fixed. It doesn't immediately fix it. You might have to live with that sadness for a while. But what I can do and what I have got is this ability to say there can be a new start. There can be hope. And even in the midst of that, there can be something positive to walk through, not just head down into a hole of depression.
Thanks so much for sharing. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story here, Clayton, and sharing about your mum. Obviously, it's a very difficult and challenging time, and I do hope that your Mother's Day has been okay, and that's your first one without your mum, that you can reflect and honour her in many ways that are positive. So, Clayton, how can I cope on Mother's Day without mum?
Yeah, I think that the number one thing is to start with that moment of honesty and reality. Where are you at? Be kind to yourself in that moment. If you have that Christian faith, dig into that. Dig into asking Jesus to fill you with that peace that he talks about. It's just a chapter or two later from the words that we read there that he promises to fill us with peace that passes understanding, that passes our feelings and our emotions and what those things are as we come to him. And the key next part of it is to rely on him, do it in thanksgiving and an act of dependence. And I think as we do that, we can have a peace. And I think that the awesome thing about those verses there is that it is a peace that passes understanding. We might not understand why it is there. It doesn't quite make sense. So can I cope? Yes, I can. There's going to be sadness. There's going to be tears. That's the idea. That's right. But we can rest in that knowledge that, especially if our mum has had that faith as well, and as we do, that to live was Christ, but to die is truly gain, and that's what she's living with right now.
There's hope. There's hope.
Absolutely.
Bjelan. Yeah. Well, let me leave you with some of the Bible's answer to the big question: how can I cope on Mother's Day without mum? From Philippians 1:21, for to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. I look forward to you joining us next time for bigger questions. Thanks very much to our guest today, Clayton Bjelan.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.